changes coming down, and I'm not sure if we know what all those will be related to U.S. immigration and travel restrictions and so on. But we do have a Grand Rapids-based attorney. She's with Varnum. Kim Clarke is in studio and talking about local impact. And I guess maybe some of this is wait and see, and some of it we can kind of project out. Attorney Kim Clarke is with us. Good morning, or good afternoon. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Okay, so tell us a little bit about your background. Do you deal with immigration law in particular?
Right. My focus at Varnum is immigration law, and I've been doing that for over 17 years, and mostly employment-based, but we do some family-based as well.
Okay. It's an interesting area to focus on in Michigan, but you say employment-based, so it's making sure that companies have legal workers, basically, or?
Right. There's two sides to the employment-based piece of it. It's making proactive applications for individuals that companies want to hire and bring in that are foreign nationals, and then there's the compliance piece of helping employers, making sure that all the workers they do hire have authorization to work in the U.S.
Okay. And there's plenty of work. If you've been doing it for 17 years, there's plenty of work to do on this, right?
There is, definitely.
Okay. So what are some of your thoughts on the local impact of what was announced several weeks ago? And I know part of it is, it's tied up in court. And I guess this week there are going to be some new edicts coming down. Where do we stand right now?
What we understand is that the travel ban, we'll take that first, the travel ban was stayed in court. And so it was then released then for anyone who needed to travel from those countries were then again allowed to come back in. We're anticipating that we're going to hear and have signed within the next day or so a revision on that. And what we understand that revision to be is really about people who haven't been through the visa process yet. So when the travel ban was implemented, it stopped everyone, whether they had a valid visa or whether they were a permanent resident, if they were a citizen from those 7 countries. Now it appears the travel ban is going to be limited to people who haven't been here before or need a new visa in order to come here.
Okay. You mentioned a green card. I thought if you had a green card, you were okay, but maybe not if you were from one of those 7 countries?
Maybe not if you were from one of those 7 countries. And that was some of what we saw in the implementation when in that early phase there. And it was not clear, and the information was not clear, so the officers didn't know how to clearly respond to that. So some permanent residents were allowed through, and they tried to clarify that, but there were some that were caught up in it and returned.
With new guidelines, I guess, coming later this week, does the Trump administration even have to care about what happens with the part that's stalled in the courts? Does this wipe that away, or?
They could decide to continue that, but I think that what we are hearing is that they will let that court fight go and focus on their new directives that are coming out.
Okay. Let's talk about immigration, the immigration angle. What is the local impact of that?
Well, this week we saw two new policy memos that came out on the executive orders that were talking about interior enforcement and the border enforcement.
Okay.
And so those executive orders were issued back in January, but then this week we got kind of the details on how that was going to be played out. And I think that the impact to the local employers will be found out over time. And so there are individuals that are employed with our local employers, and our local employers have every understanding from information they were provided that those workers are authorized, but it may turn out that they weren't. And those individuals may be caught up in these deportation processes, and then as a result, the local employers lose their employees.
Wow.
Yeah. And the bad news is there's no way to correct it for a lot of individuals. Our immigration system doesn't allow a fix to immigration problems right now. And so if you're an employer and you find out that your employee got picked up, there's a great likelihood there's nothing you can do to help them.
And that has not always been the case, right? This is new with these new with this new executive order?
It has always been the case.
Okay.
There's just more deportation going on right now. There's more enforcement activities, and there's more instances of it. But the deportation rules have always been there. If you've been here illegally and you're found and arrested, you will be put through a deportation process and sent back.
Okay. And there's nothing really in the way of legal recourse in that case.
Probably not. I mean, each individual should have an opportunity to talk with an immigration lawyer, maybe already has, but there's so many limited opportunities to correct status. If you've been here illegally, the immigration laws typically do not allow you to correct your status.
Okay. What about the border angle? Is that probably concerns you less, I'm guessing, right?
Right. It's more of a potential pool of applicants that could be coming in each year for employers that are maybe stopped at the border. And so the impact would be less direct than workers that are actively working for employers.
So if you're an employer in West Michigan and your talent pool may be global, if you're looking for the best people, there's probably talented people all over the planet, right? This does, you have to rethink that perhaps, or know that maybe your talent pool is smaller, or that less people will be applying, or what's the real world impact?
The real world impact in that context is different. So what we were talking about was enforcement of deportation of people who were here illegally and on legal status. There's a whole other realm of employment, immigration, proactive benefits that you could secure. And that is what I do a lot of the time at Varnum. And the concerns there is that we haven't had any updates to those systems in a long time. So I work with a lot of employers who bring in foreign talent at high-skilled jobs, but we have limits on those. H-1B visas are coming up. We can file those April 1. Last year, only 36% of the applications filed were selected to be processed. It wasn't even a merit problem that they got to the process and then didn't get approved, but only 36% of the applications filed were even allowed to proceed.
Two questions. One, what is H-1B?
H-1B is a high-skilled visa that you are filling a specialty occupation. An employer sponsors you, and you need to have a minimum of a bachelor degree. But often the individuals that I process have master's, PhD level. It's really high-skilled people who are going through this process.
Okay. And why the backlog that has nothing to do with merit? Is it simply because there's not enough people to process this?
No, because there's a limit. So the United States government has a limit on the H-1B visas of 85,000 per year, 65,000 in a general bachelor pool, and then an extra 20,000 if you have a master's degree or above.
So is it if you qualify, it's first in, or how does it work?
No, it's they collect for the first week. So everyone's scrambling to get their applications ready and file them on April 1. USCIS, that's who processes these petitions, collects for a week and then runs a random lottery to decide which 36% get them.
Random lottery.
Yes.
Okay, so it's all a crapshoot.
It is, and we don't even know what the percentage is going to be because we don't know what the demand is going to be until that week of filing.
Would you guess that the demand would be higher or lower now?
Increasing. Every year it's been increasing. And even though there's been kind of a chilling effect with some of the employers that I'll talk to who have gotten burned in the last couple of years when their applications weren't selected, they're like, why am I going to put the money and effort in this if I'm not going to get a visa? And bottom line is they need the workers, so they take the shot.
Okay. What about the 7 countries? This is part of the executive order, and I guess that's still going to be in place. Those 7 countries are still what the administration is circling. Does that? How does that strike you?
There's been a lot of conversation whether that's the right 7 countries or not, and whether those are the target, the correct target. I think from what we're hearing, the administration is going to stick with that initially, but yeah, there's a lot of debate over that.
Yeah. I mean, look at your Facebook feed. You can see
right.
you get a million different memes on those countries versus some others that that there's no travel restrictions on.
Right.
The 5,000 additional border patrol officers and the wall that is yet to be built. Will it be built? I don't know. I'll just throw that number out, and then the 10,000 additional immigration officers for law enforcement. Is that a local law enforcement angle that they're going to be saying, okay, if you find someone who has an illegal status, then you're now an immigration officer in addition to an officer for Kent County or Grand Rapids Police Department or whatever?
There's 2 pieces to that. So the 5,000 and 10,000 are actually intended to be U.S. Government workers, so at the federal level. But there's also provision within these policies to do partnerships with local law enforcement. And so some of the local law enforcement can be involved in the immigration enforcement activities.
Okay. Do you deal at all with sanctuary cities and that kind of thing? Is that an area of interest for you?
I've certainly answered some questions about that, and there's a lot of concern as to what's going to happen with those, and there's competing issues on both sides, and
sure.
And whether to provide a safe place for people to remain, and whether that is potentially impacting enforcement of the immigration laws, and so I expect that dialogue will continue to be present.
And I'm sure there are attorneys that disagree on this because, on one hand, people might say, well, if you're not here legally, how do you determine what laws we're going to follow? And then there's municipalities and other entities that are saying these are human beings. They've been here for a while. They're working. They're part of the community, and they deserve some sort of safe harbor while this is being sorted out. Is that fair?
That is a fair analysis of it, and it is not going to end. That conversation is just going to get more and more heightened as we work our way through these issues.
Are you going to be busier or less busy?
I have been a lot busier in the last few weeks.
Well, and how do you think this will? It's undetermined how it will shake out, right?
It is, and I think that the one thing that we hope for as immigration lawyers is that we're actually finally talking about it, because for years during the first year of a new president's administration, nobody wanted to touch immigration because it was too much of a hot potato. Mm-hmm. So we'd wait till the second year, and then, midterms are coming up, so we don't want to talk about a hot potato topic. So I'm encouraged by the fact that we're talking about it. Do I, wonder where things are going to end up? Absolutely. And I think everybody does. And I think there's lots of conversation yet to be had and proposals to be made.
If I'm an employer, I'm calling an attorney like you, right? If I've got international talent that I'm looking at, to say, Kim, what do I do here?
Right. That's how it works. And then we run through all the different discrete visa categories and see if we can fit someone in. And that's one of the issues with employment-based immigration, is it's certain categories. And so if you don't fit within the particular requirements of a category, you may have the best person globally that you want to bring in for something, but I might not have a vehicle to bring them in on a work visa.
Okay. What's the unknown here that we haven't talked about that you deal with maybe every day or weekly that our listeners should know about regarding immigration and this visa and deportation and all of that?
The unknown is, I think that there are many people working within our community that have successfully gone through visa processes and become permanent residents. And when we talk about immigration a lot, we tend to focus on the illegal immigration problem and enforcement, but we forget about the proactive, everyone who did things the right way and got themselves here and created a career for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Do you deal at all with refugees?
I have some.
Uh-huh. We had a conversation with a woman who runs the refugee program for Bethany, and
Donna Abbott.
Yes, and she's terrific.
She is.
And
I was on the Bethany board for a while.
Oh, very good. Well, she talked about all the the Trump administration talks about extreme vetting, and it's the way she explained it. It's rather thorough right now. Is that? Would you say that's
accurate? That's a fair statement.
And those people were kind of stopped in their tracks for a while. Where does that stand right now? Is that still?
I think it's still stopped in their tracks right now. And the U.S. government has control, aside from an executive order, in determining when people are going to leave refugee camps. And it's a very long wait already. And so while there's a delay, it probably is not that much more delay than they've already experienced in their really long path here.
Okay. Kim Clarke is with us. She's an attorney at Varnum, and her area of expertise is immigration law, and you must be popular at cocktail parties right now. Everybody wants to talk to you, right?
It's a lot of fun, yeah. It's a lot of fun to know the issues that are in the news the most.
And this is something that, as you said, there's more and more people. Every year it goes up. People want to come to this country, and you don't anticipate that changing or getting any less complicated. Is that fair?
That is fair. I think that people will continue to want to come here, and I hope that we find some path through to make the processes work better. But right now, we're not close to having those.
Where will we be a year from now?
I hope we have some meaningful proposals. There are people who know how to make this better, and there are countries that have reformed their immigration system. We just need to pay attention and take some action.
Who's doing it right?
I've seen.
Is Canada doing it right?
Canada has a different process, and they're doing it different. And I think there are some things that we can learn from Canada. The UK just went through a whole series of renovations on their immigration processes, and I think that that's where we can look. We can look at experiences and proposals that have happened across the world and try to figure out what works for us.
And the Trump administration says, "Hey, this is all about safety. It's your safety, your family's safety." and so on. Would you say that our system is safe right now, or is there work? Is that a fair conversation to have?
I think it's always a fair conversation to have, but I think it's being had without full information. And I think, your example from Donna Abbott and understanding what already is being done, I think there's a learning process that's happening to have the administration and the new officials really understand what we already do.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think most people are woefully not adequately informed about this. My grandparents came to this country from a different country. Like a lot of people, it's a universal story, right?
Right.
But I don't know anything about it other than a 60 Minutes piece I saw, a conversation with Donna Abbott, and a conversation with you. And that's it. And I think I'm not that different than most people in the United States.
I think most people think that if you are someone across the world who wants to come to the U.S., you just have to go through the process and you can get here. Mm-hmm. And it's really not that way. It is far more limited than that. And that's the conversation I often have with people, is to make them understand the severe restrictions we already have on immigration. And so then it makes people understand, okay, maybe now I understand why people might have tried to come here even in an illegal way to try to better their life, because they didn't have an available avenue.
What about tourism? If I'm a tourist from Europe or from the Middle East or Africa, and it's time for a family vacation, we've dreamed of coming to America for a long time, what kind of process am I going through to get my family here for 2 weeks to look at the Grand Canyon and go to Disneyland?
Depends on which country you're from. So there's a visa waiver program that's in place with many countries, mostly European and some in Asia. Then it's easy. You're just signing up online and you're coming in. For a lot of other countries, you're going to need to go through a visa process. And depending on what we see with the new memo that's coming out on what extreme vetting might look like, that may detour some people from taking their trips here, because if the visa process becomes too burdensome.
Is the tourism industry concerned about this? They must be.
I would think they are. Yeah.
Okay. And if I am bringing my family from one of those, from a part of the world that one of these 7 countries might be a part of, but you mentioned something about a waiver. I could bring in my family / terror cell and buy a ticket, or would there be some sort of vetting for me along the way?
So if you're from so the visa waiver countries means that people who hold that passport can come in for 90 days without getting a visa. So they don't have to go to the consulate. They don't have to be interviewed. And each individual has that same right if they're a citizen from that country. Mm-hmm. But if you're not a citizen from one of those visa waiver countries, you have to get your own visa. So you'll be individually reviewed.
Would that be a loophole then, though? If let's say I've got ill intent and I'm from a country that has this waiver, and I do have, nefarious plans, that's a loophole, right? Is that something I would look for if I were a terrorist?
If I was a terrorist and I was a citizen of one of those countries, I could get here without having to go through a visa process.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which it kind of makes me think that if that's what you really wanted to do, you wouldn't take the time. I mean, it's like, people who are taking the time to register their guns and go to a gun class, they're probably not going to commit the crimes, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Are you optimistic about the future?
I am. I think that the conversation is going to help us identify the issues and hopefully then move towards resolution.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Kim Clarke is an attorney at Varnum. If you have questions about this, varnum.com?
VarnumLaw.com.
VarnumLaw.com. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
This is News Talk 1340 WJRW. We'll take a quick break and be back in just a moment.